On a cold October night, the town buzzed with the spirit of Halloween. Kids scuttled down the streets in costumes, laughter ringing out as they filled their buckets with candy. Adults were busy preparing for their own festivities, eager to celebrate the night of ghouls and goblins. But far away from the lively streets, perched ominously at the edge of town, stood a mansion that seemed to whisper of forgotten horrors. This old mansion had a long and troubled history. Abandoned for decades, it was a hulking relic of a bygone era. Its tall, rotting structure was a patchwork of decay, with cracked windows resembling hollow eyes and walls enveloped in thick, twisting vines. Local legends shrouded the place in a veil of fear, stories of ghostly figures, eerie whispers, and dark shadows that seemed to dance on their own. The mansion had gained a reputation as a place where only the brave or foolish dared to tread, especially on Halloween. However, a group of adventurous college students, driven by a thirst for excitement, decided that this was the perfect location for their Halloween party. Led by Sarah, a daring and headstrong girl, they thought a night spent in a haunted mansion would create a memorable experience. What better way to celebrate Halloween than in a place rumored to be haunted? The thrill of exploring the unknown while reveling with friends filled them with enthusiasm. For weeks, Sarah had orchestrated every detail of the party, inviting friends, decorating the space with Halloween-themed items, and planning spooky activities. They all agreed that the old mansion would add an exhilarating touch to their festivities, turning a simple gathering into a haunted adventure. The excitement in the air was electric as they piled into a van, ready for what they believed would be a night to remember. As they arrived at the mansion just before dusk, the atmosphere shifted. A dense fog clung to the ground, swirling around their feet as they approached the imposing structure. The air felt colder than it had been in town, and a shiver ran down Sarah's spine as she gazed up at the towering edifice. The massive wooden door, adorned with rusty iron hinges, creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing a dark, dusty interior that had not been touched by time. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like gossamer veils, and a musty odor filled the air, tinged with the scent of decay. The wooden floorboards groaned under their weight as they stepped inside, their voices echoing through the cavernous halls. Despite the mansion's eerie presence, the group's excitement remained palpable. They quickly began setting up decorations, stringing fake cobwebs and placing carved pumpkins around the main hall, transforming the once foreboding space into a festive party area. Soon, the mansion buzzed with life as guests began to arrive, each one dressed in elaborate costumes: vampires, witches, zombies, and even a few characters from classic horror films filled the room. The atmosphere was jovial, laughter ringing out as friends greeted one another. The music began to play, filling the old mansion with a modern rhythm that clashed oddly with its historical ambiance. For a while, the dark, unsettling energy that hung in the air seemed to dissipate beneath the joyful noise. As the night deepened, however, the mansion's unsettling presence made itself known once again. It began subtly at first, a sudden drop in temperature, a draft that made everyone shiver, even as they were gathered around with drinks in hand. A few guests mentioned how cold it felt, but they laughed it off as part of the spooky ambiance. Then came the sounds, soft, barely perceptible creaks and whispers that seemed to float through the air. Conversations began to die down as the partygoers exchanged nervous glances, the lighthearted mood taking on an unsettling edge. Sarah, ever the skeptic, waved away their fears. "It's just an old house. It creaks and groans. Don't let it ruin our fun," she proclaimed. Though her heart raced, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It felt as if the mansion were alive, watching them. Without warning, the music stopped. The sudden silence was jarring, the vibrant atmosphere replaced by a heavy, suffocating stillness. Conversations halted as everyone turned toward the speakers. Confusion etched on their faces. The lights flickered erratically before plunging the mansion into darkness. For a moment, panic took hold, and no one moved. The only sounds were the distant rustling of wind outside and the creaking of the old floorboards. Just as some reached for their phones to illuminate the darkness, a low, guttural growl echoed through the hall. It was a sound that sent chills down their spines, deep and unnatural, resonating from somewhere within the depths of the mansion. Fear gripped the group as they instinctively huddled closer together. The floor beneath their feet began to tremble, a low rumble intensifying with each passing moment. Suddenly, the massive chandelier hanging above them swayed violently, the crystals clinking together like a chorus of chimes. Then, in a horrifying display, the chandelier crashed to the floor, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. Screams erupted as guests scrambled to avoid the shower of deadly debris. From the darkness at the far end of the hall, a grotesque silhouette materialized. Its form was otherworldly and misshapen, reminiscent of something from a fever dream. Pale, scarred skin glistened in the dim light, and its eyes burned a fierce, unholy red. Long, jagged claws scraped against the wooden floor as it lumbered toward the group, leaving a trail of fear in its wake. At first, some of the guests laughed nervously, thinking it was merely an elaborate prank, but their laughter quickly faded as the creature let out a bone-chilling roar, a sound that reverberated through the hall and froze them in their tracks. Chaos erupted as people fled in all directions, panic taking over the room. Some raced toward the front doors, only to find them locked tight. Others dashed up the grand staircase, hoping to escape the terror that had invaded their sanctuary. But the mansion was no longer just a backdrop for their Halloween festivities. It had transformed into a living nightmare, and it was hungry. Sarah found herself separated from the group in the madness. She ducked into a side room, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint light of the moon filtering through a cracked window. The sounds of screams and heavy footsteps echoed through the halls, a cacophony of terror surrounding her. The creature was hunting them, and time was running out. As Sarah caught her breath, she took a moment to survey her surroundings. Unlike the rest of the mansion, this room was eerily pristine. Ancient books lined the walls, their leather covers worn but dignified, hinting at the knowledge they held within. A large, ornate mirror hung on the far wall, reflecting the faint moonlight and casting an otherworldly glow throughout the room. In the center stood a tall, wooden pedestal, and atop it rested an old, leather-bound book. Driven by an overwhelming curiosity, she approached the pedestal, her fingertips brushing against the cool leather. The book's cover was embossed with strange symbols, the pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through the pages, her heart raced. The text was written in a language she couldn't decipher, but as she continued, she found a section that seemed different. Diagrams filled the pages, circles, runes, and symbols that pulsated with an eerie energy. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open, and Tom, one of her friends, stumbled inside, his face pale and strained with fear. "Sarah, we have to get out of here," he gasped, his voice shaking. "That thing. It's killing people." Before Sarah could respond, the creature's roar echoed through the mansion once again, closer this time. Without thinking, she grabbed the book and stuffed it into her bag. "Come on," she said, pulling Tom toward the door. "We need to find the others." The two of them cautiously navigated the dark corridors of the mansion, trying to avoid the monstrous entity that had invaded their party. They could hear the terrified screams of their friends, the heavy thud of footsteps, and the sickening crunch of bones echoing through the halls as the creature claimed its victims. As they reached the main hall, they found a small group of survivors huddled together, their faces pale with terror. Among them was Mark, another of their friends. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. This was supposed to be a party, not a death trap. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her mind racing. "But I found something, a book. It might have answers." She quickly pulled the book from her bag, showing it to the group. As they examined the pages, they found what appeared to be a ritual, a way to banish the creature and close whatever portal had been opened in the mansion. However, the ritual required certain items, and most disturbingly, it called for a sacrifice. "We have to try it," Sarah said, her voice resolute despite the fear swirling around them. "If we don't, that thing will kill all of us." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They split up, each tasked with finding one of the ingredients needed for the ritual: a silver knife, candles, and salt. As they searched the mansion, they encountered more horrors. Ghostly figures floated through the halls, their faces twisted in agony, as if they were reliving their own traumatic deaths. Shadowy whispers echoed in their ears, tempting them with promises of escape. Mark and Tom stumbled upon the kitchen, where they were horrified to find a writhing mass of snakes slithering from the cabinets. Some of the snakes had human-like eyes, watching them with a sinister intelligence. They quickly grabbed a silver knife from a butcher's block before fleeing the room. Hearts racing, Sarah and another friend, Emily, searched the basement, where they found candles sitting atop an old, rotting table. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of mold. As they grabbed the candles, they heard footsteps echoing behind them. They turned to find a rotting corpse shambling toward them. Its hollow eyes locked onto theirs. They screamed and ran, narrowly escaping the grasping hands of the dead. Finally, they regrouped in the grand hall, breathless and terrified but with everything they needed for the ritual. They laid out the items on the floor and prepared the space, drawing a large circle with the salt. The atmosphere grew tense as they prepared to summon the creature and banish it back to the darkness. As they began the incantation, the air around them thickened, and the temperature dropped dramatically. A gust of wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. Despite their fear, they pressed on, their voices echoing through the silence, determined to complete the ritual. Suddenly, the creature burst into the hall, its form grotesque and terrifying. It roared, its eyes blazing with rage as it charged toward them. Sarah and the others felt a wave of panic wash over them, but they stood their ground, the salt circle providing a barrier against the creature's wrath. Sarah stepped into the circle and began to recite the words from the book. The creature slammed into the invisible barrier of the circle, snarling and clawing at the air, but it couldn't get through. The air around them shimmered as the ritual took hold. The mansion shook, and the walls groaned as if the building itself was fighting against them, but they continued, their voices rising above the noise. It felt as if the mansion were a living entity, writhing in pain and anger as they invoked forces beyond their understanding. Then came the sacrifice. A heavy silence fell over the group as they realized the implications of what they were attempting. One of the members, Alex, a brave and fiercely loyal friend, stepped forward, his face grim but determined. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "It's the only way." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she realized what he was willing to give up. "Are you sure?" she asked, her heart breaking at the thought of losing him. Alex nodded, the resolve in his eyes unwavering. He picked up the silver knife, his hand trembling slightly as he drew it across his palm. Blood dripped to the floor, and the moment it touched the salt circle, the air crackled with energy. The creature let out a final, ear-piercing scream as it was pulled back into the void from which it had come. The air crackled with energy, and the portal that had been opened slowly closed. As the ritual reached its climax, the mansion trembled violently, the walls shaking as if the very structure was being torn apart. When the light faded, the survivors stood in silence. The mansion, now quiet, was a shell of its former self. They had survived the night, but they knew that the horrors they had faced would haunt them forever. As the remaining candles flickered and dimmed, the group exchanged weary glances, each of them grappling with the weight of what had just transpired. Sarah felt a deep ache in her heart for Alex, who had given his life to save them. "We need to get out of here," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Now." They made their way through the now quiet halls, the mansion feeling strangely empty without the terror that had filled it moments before. As they exited the front door, the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, illuminating the fog that still lingered around the mansion. The morning light felt like a blessing, washing away the darkness of the night. But even as they stepped outside, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and the air felt heavy with unspoken words. When they finally reached their van, they collapsed inside, exhausted but alive. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but they had also forged unbreakable bonds. The experience had changed them, marking them forever. Each of them had lost a piece of themselves that night, a part that would never fully return. As they drove away from the mansion, Sarah glanced back at the towering structure in the rearview mirror. Its windows seemed to watch them, the air thick with lingering malevolence. The tales of the mansion would continue, weaving into the fabric of the town's lore. But for them, it was a chapter they would never forget. In the weeks that followed, whispers of their harrowing night at the mansion circulated through the town. Some dismissed it as an elaborate prank. Others shuddered at the thought of the cursed place. But Sarah and her friends knew the truth. They were forever bound by the darkness they had faced together. Sarah often found herself staring out the window at the mansion, haunted by memories of that night. She could still hear the echoes of the screams, the roars of the creature, and the moment Alex sacrificed himself. He had become a part of their story, a hero in their tragedy. But as the leaves turned and the air grew colder, something deep within her stirred. Halloween approached again, and with it came a sense of dread. The mansion, though silent, felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting. The town's lore began to shift, tales of the creature morphing into stories of Alex's bravery, and whispers of the Halloween haunting spread like wildfire. Somewhere deep beneath the mansion's foundation, something stirred, waiting for the next Halloween night to come. It felt as if the shadows were gathering, preparing for a return. And while Sarah and her friends would move on, carrying the scars of their experience, they knew the darkness would always linger just beyond the edge of the light. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and the thin veil separating reality from the abyss. The mansion, with its secrets and shadows, would always be a part of them, a haunting reminder of a night that transformed innocent fun into a battle for survival. And as the townspeople prepared for another Halloween, the echoes of the past loomed large, waiting to be reborn.